Okay, now as I was talking about squares, here's a variety of them. Some are good, some are not so good. This is a rafting square. It probably is the least accurate of them, but if you have a large area, you might be able to see light underneath here. That certainly is a quick way to find out what's right or what's wrong. I also do it that way. This one back. And these are probably a little more conventional. This was a nice one. It's rosewood, but unfortunately this wood kind of moves around with the weather. And that's not so good. So it's not super accurate, but for squaring off a gunstock, certainly it will work. Now, down along the ways, this little tiny thing is made by, I think this one actually is a Sterret. It's 4 inches. It's a little adjustable one. Probably you have a 6-inch one. It will work. This one's just a whole lot more convenient. And of course, I usually have it tucked in my apron pocket. Further along the line, you're going to be using this to offset some sides of your barrels, to locate locks, triggers, things like that. And this little tiny ability, and you can hold it in one hand and mark with the other, and all kinds of contortions. It really comes in handy. So if you can possibly get one, I do recommend it. Again, the better woodworking stores, they will all have these. And last of all, this is sometimes called a master square or an engineer square. And that's exactly all it does. It's square. It's 90 degrees. There's no measuring, nothing like that. And you can run this back and forth, or you can use it to check how square your other stuff is. And don't use it against the rafting square. It is kind of disappointing. I use this for setting up saws, all the other kind of stuff. Now, some of the marking, after you got all this squared up, and you've, I'll go over how you start figuring out where to set the metal. Well, these are used for marking where that metal goes. They work surprisingly similar, even though they certainly look a lot different. This one has a disc, and the main trick to this disc is you keep it sharp, and I've had sliced my fingers a few times. I want to get a little careless, so be careful, but you don't want it to turn. It's very tempting to loosen the little screw in the middle, and as you're rolling it along, let it spin so that you have to use less effort. That's really not a very good idea. You want to set the thing down hard enough so that you leave a light line as you go along. Now, if you're getting old and grouchy like me and can't see, then you use a pencil. Make sure it's good and sharp. And probably not the best use of a chisel, but you want a very good sharp point. And what we're going to do, you don't want to drag, because this line that you just put in is very fine, and quite often the softer grain is going to jerk your pencil around. So you want to push it and very carefully follow your new line, and which I'm not doing too well at the moment. But you can follow that little dent, and now you have a line that actually follows where you put your dent in. Now this is another kind. This one I can adjust. I turn this wheel, well, and it goes in and out very nicely. You can get super accurate. It's not cheap. If you do a lot of woodworking, these definitely are something to consider. This is probably closer to what you're more accustomed to. It works well. Works on a chalk system. Now some of these actually have two. One is this blade, and the other section that you can move back and forth is actually a pin or a cone that comes down to a point. Do yourself a favor on the side that's in between these two pins, very carefully file it flat. What's going to happen with that cone is it will want to follow the grain. You don't want it to follow the grain, you want it to go where you want to. So by putting a flat spot on the front of it, you now have a cutting edge and it'll behave itself a whole lot better. And of course, always getting this wedge to behave where you want it to, and it can be a bit of a problem. Part of the fun. You'll need calipers. This is a very simple dial. It's a 6-inch. This one is metal and it has little tiny teeth, and that's what causes the dials to go around. There's a more expensive version that's all electronic, and it doesn't have these little teeth in it that sometimes fill up with dust, or if you've been filing recently, you'll end up with shavings in it, and of course that gums everything up. And well, we won't see what my language is when that occurs, but well, I'll leave it to your imagination. Tape measure, that always comes in handy. And part of the problem I guess a lot of people have is dragging out the calculator. Like I said before, I'm not so good when it comes to numbers, so I have to find a way around some of these odds and ends. And to find the exact center can be problematical with something like this. Well, I'm not about to try to draw all those figures. So what I do is I kind of cheat. Okay, this is how I go about dividing something up. If, say I need to divide this into 4 even sections, well, I'm not about to go through the math and then have to use a caliper and get all the measurements right and then put all these lines down. That confuses. So what I do is I come up with a number I can easily divide by 4. Say 6, that's 1.5. Set a tape down and I measure out here to 6, just put it at an angle. And the trick is here is if you start on this side of the tape measure, make sure you finish on this side of the tape measure. Every once in a while, if you're in a hurry or not thinking, you'll do one of these, and boy, that sure messes things up. So use the same size as the tape measure, and we'll measure off, 1.5 inches, 3, 4.5, and 6. Now as I made these little marks, this is where something like this comes in really handy. The first mark here, put that on, and again I have no idea what the real distance is. Go to the next one, and yes, I'm kind of abbreviating this, and there you are. So now it's divided up into 4. Okay, now some of these specialty tools, I'll start off with this one. These aren't necessary, but they certainly do help, and it's an odd thing like that looks like this. This actually, and just ignore the pooch barking upstairs. I think it's chow time. But what this is supposed to do is line up the back part on this side of the comb with the front part of the comb. And this will give you an idea of how straight from here to the back is. Your eye can pick it up, but it's awful hard trying to measure over the top of this cheek piece. If you have a Monte Carlo, of course, it's going to be much taller, and it certainly is difficult. And you can work your way all the way around. And the last part of this is going to be checkering. I've been asked quite a bit about how and where you put those little lines. Well, this is one of the patterns I was doing. And lo and behold, I found out that a very flat surface is the hardest thing in the world to get a straight line on. When you're working on a gunstock and you have all these curved surfaces, it's a lot easier. So if you're going to practice any of this, find a very thick round, like a stair banister or something that has a curve to it. It's a lot easier. Also, don't try this curly cue. Trying to follow a curve with something that wants to cut straight, it'll give you a heartache. Yes, I was showing off when I did this, but I've had a bit of practice. Please don't try this for your first attempt. It'll be painful. But anyway, what kind of tools do you use? Well, the first ones everybody thinks of are these power tools. Well, like everything else, yes, you can remove wood a lot faster, but this is not the way to begin. If you use these, you'll remove a lot of wood in a big hurry, and it won't be wood that you wanted to remove. It does take some skill. So first you want to use is hand tools. You have a short tool for going around corners and stopping at the end of your lines. This one is called a stepping stool tool. You notice one side is smooth, one side is sharp. The smooth one goes in your previous line that you just cut, and of course you cut a new one with this side. This tool is a single cutter, and you just use that for going deeper. Now when you have an exception, you want to do a skip line, you have something that's big and wide like this. You can see where there's a smooth one and then one that has grooves in it. And then what everybody's friend is what's called a joiner. This is sold separately. This is when your lines are really starting to go really haywire, and it's a last resort. This actually more or less just puts a dent in the wood. Yeah, you can try to sharpen it. I usually don't. I want to start with a dent because the grain is the one that's pulled my checking tool off to the side, and you end up with this something that's, well, looks like a drunken sailor. You're following his path. This will put a dent in the wood irregardless of where your previous crooked lines were going, and it can be a real godsend. They're sometimes hard to find. They're a bit on the pricey side, but if you're going to do checkering, I highly suggest getting one of these. It's a lifesaver. Now each one of these bits, who makes them? These are Dembarts, checkering lines, you name it. I couldn't tell you. This is a mixture of handles. It's a mixture of bits. And you can see hanging off here, these are just nails or brads I push through. If you have some 35 thousandths wire from a welder, this works pretty well as well. Some of these do rock a little. I found out it really doesn't hurt 6 1 1/2 dozen the other. Okay, now one of the things you'll notice with this, there's no borders. And that means each one of these lines, you'll repeat it anywhere from 5 to 7 times. And trying to stop always at the same place, it gets to be problematical. Well, one of the kind of workarounds is something called a vaner. And if you notice, this is just a little tiny V tool. And I mentioned earlier how to sharpen it. You take the two sides, work them independently, and then as you're sharpening, you roll over the bottom here, so this is always nicely rounded, and you won't end up with that prow of looks like one of the Roman warships where they used to ram each other, because you got this thing sticking out the front. But anyway, at the very tip of this, you can come in with this V tool, and it's just a little tiny wood chip that you can pop out. And then you can also clean it up by just following it, and this V tool goes around a corner a whole lot easier than one of those checkering tools. And of course, part of the problem is it might go around a little too easy, and you'll end up twisting, especially with the grain, because if the grain's going this way, I start out chiseling, and as you're going around, you could end up going across grain, with the grain, against the grain, you name it. So here, patience and perseverance, and go very slowly and very carefully, hold it with both hands, you can make a pretty good pattern.